Jonas here. Here's a question for you. How fast can you learn? In this age where major changes are happening around the world, we really can't afford to learn slowly. That's why I spent 6 months trying to study Justin Sung's learning system. If you don't know Justin Sung, he's one of the best learning coach out there. He has many great videos as he developed his own learning system. And what I'll try to do here is connect all the things I've learned in the past 6 months and give you more a broad picture into how you could do proper learning using distance methods. That's why this video will be much helpful if you are trying to do a self-study or maybe are in your secondary school or maybe university. And with that, let's break down the lessons into three main themes. So the first one is learning as a cognitive load and higher order thinking. So when Justin talks about cognitive load, he's trying to tell us what the real feeling of learning is. Obvious enough, learning is what happens in our brain. It's the thinking part, being able to retrieve, that we call learning. And it is this process that's heavy lifting for the brain. It's exhausting and it requires time. And we usually skip this workout. We have these habits of doing a bunch of flashcards. We write long notes or do mini AI summaries like these days, or maybe like I used to do, read the topic 3 times. But none of this really help because they are just delaying the real learning. As you can see here, there is hybrid learning of evaluate and analyze. And as we go down, we can see understanding and trying to memorize. And in the past, I remember whenever I tried to read a text or learn about something, I tried to memorize it. I tried to understand the definitions first. But it took me time and never did I really understand the topic. But just in read the commands that we do higher order learning first, the higher order thinking first before we understand and memorize things. The idea here is that thinking must not be delayed, writing notes, or doing any other things. We must prioritize doing the higher order learning first, and then the understanding the details and the memorizing part comes naturally. And the way we do the evaluating, the analyze part is we actively ask, how is it important, how is it relevant, and how does it connect with the things we've been reading through. You need to know learning has a discomfort, a desired discomfort, and if that is not happening in your brain, you're just delaying the real learning. The second thing Justin talks about is learning system. So a learning system is a bunch of techniques and methods that give you the learning efficiency that you are trying to bring. So they are not just random techniques. They are just consistent to the way our memory works, how we rest, how we focus, and how we manage our time. So there are main techniques and tools that Justin used them to improve his learning speed or efficiency, like cramming early to do more encoding later on, and taking nonlinear notes to build concepts and do much more Pomodoro effective resting blocks, and using AI chatbots, obviously, many more. If you want to improve your learning speed and mastery, you need to understand that it takes time. That's why it took me 6 months. And it's about how you consistently journal and evaluate yourself based on, how you intended to study, how you studied, and how much you could retrieve using the techniques you used. So the third thing I have is the learning steps you need to follow. There were many things I really never considered before, finding out about distance learning methods. So the first thing is priming. And priming is essentially trying to create a big picture in your head before you delve into the details. And this is where you do most of the higher order learning and the higher order thinking part. So there is this analogy of catching a ball. Imagine you are throwing a ball suddenly to someone and they are likely to drop the ball. But if you tell them that you are going to throw the ball and throw it, they are suddenly much more capable of holding the ball. It's similar thing with our brain. When we tell it that what we are going to do with information and how is it important, how is it relevant, it becomes much more capable of holding the information that we are feeding it. So the steps you need to take to do priming is you define the topic and the scope you will read now, and then you give yourself 10 to 15 time limit because you don't want to delve into the details. You don't want to be bothered with the details. And then what we will do here is that get keywords from the topic you will be reading. So you skim through the pages, you find keywords that feel relevant, that feel that you could understand them, that can explain the topic you're reading, and having those keywords, you build a concept. So you build a concept with the help of mind maps specifically. So mind maps are an unconventional way of taking notes. They are less wordy, they are not permanent. You change position of the keywords you've taken out, and they are the way we build a concept. So having the keywords, you try to see a relation between them, the connections they have, you compare them, you group them, and try to form some ideas before you go and study the details. And in the end, you'll have this expectation and it's some big picture to work on as you advance study or learning. And then is encoding the details. So as you can understand, this is where we build more details. We have more details about the subject. And when we try to go in depth, we similarly use mind maps, and we regroup the keywords, we add some keywords, we regroup them, and change position. We you know create direction of the keywords we are using. And yeah, similarly we use mind maps here. There's two things you could do to have a good mastery of the details. First thing is layman learning, as Justin calls it. So whenever you read a paragraph or an idea, you explain it in very simple and short sentences. And doing this pushes your brain to understand the topic in simply and have a good memory of that topic. And this is the first thing that helped me master a topic. So the second is a ladder system. So when you are learning about the details, there will be some areas that feel blurry that you don't really understand. So if you find those areas, once you read once or twice, you just skip them. And you've advanced into the subject. And once you have advanced into the subject, you go back and review that area. And suddenly it becomes much easier to remember. These two techniques helped me feel less burdened about understanding the details, because I have this space that I could learn things later on and just work on with the things I have. Then we find the two last steps. So the first one is interleaving. Interleaving is the way you master things, the way you have a broad perspective about the subject you're reading. So uh, this is how you make your brain flexible to the way you master things. You could do this by alternating between subjects or some similar areas of the subject. Let's say you're reading about you're reading on math, some areas of derivatives, and you're learning derivatives, and you are also learning about integration. So you do a little bit of derivatives and you learn a little bit of integration. You deliberately try to alternate between these two, you try to practice between these two, and you have your brain becomes much more flexible between working on different areas, and it creates much mastery about the topic you are reading. The last thing is retrieval, and this is the way we check for gaps and reduce forgetting curve. Our memory has this forgetting curve. It is much more steeper. We forget very fast when we learn about it the first time, but whenever we remember about the topic, we strengthen the memory we have about it. It's similar thing to the biology we have learned. The thing we use it becomes stronger, and the ones we don't use, they disappear, or we forget about them. So it's the same science, the same logic. There's similar thing here as well. There's something called a spaced repetition or spaced retrieval, and I apply this specifically if I want to master some area of the subject. Okay, if I want to remember something and I feel that I'm going to forget it, I remember it. I mean, I try to retrieve it after uh, 2 days, or maybe a week after, and maybe a month. So these are the two steps you could follow to have a good mastery and speed. So my experience of learning and using Justin Song's learning system, it was challenging to learn. It needed uh, time and persistence, because you are trying to unlearn the bad habits you have and form good ones. And learning a habit, having good habit takes time, and that's why you need to persist, and that's why you need to give it time to improve. It's not a work of a month or a work of a week. And if it were not for actively journaling my progress, evaluating the way I studied, the way I applied his techniques, and working on the feedbacks, have taken me much more time than this. So the good thing is, once you have improved and learned about how you could do that, you could apply everywhere. the confidence of knowing how we are going to learn something, how we are going to master something is very immense. So lately, besides the coursework I'm learning in my university, there are some skills I'm trying to learn. And learning a skill and a theory-based subject has a different approach. And so if it's theoretical, you can apply all the steps I've mentioned before. But if it's a skill based, you just need to do a little bit of priming and a little bit of encoding, and then you know spend most of your time trying to apply it, try to practice it, and learn from the feedbacks. It's much more practical because you are learning it to do it, not to just know about it. So that's what I recommend. One last thing I want you to understand is you need to be aware of the nature of the subject. When I was freshman last year, I tried to apply the same logic to every of my coursework, and it didn't make sense. I was confused because I was learning math and I was learning social sciences, and these two are different, and maths is deductive in nature. You can't really advance, you can't really learn about the other levels if you haven't really practiced it, the basics. But all of the social sciences, you could just learn something, and if you don't really understand, you could just learn other thing, and it will be just fine. Turns out this is all I had for this video. I hope I have given you some ideas you can work with, and until the next video, have a good one.